Hello, everyone. This is going to be one of the few moments in the next 2 weeks or so when I have any sort of time to sit down and not be watching, small children run around. So I wanted to talk about free will. Free will and the liquor store, I guess. So the occasion for this... I had a conversation. I've been meaning to make this video for a while. I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with an associate who essentially thought I was too optimistic about the people's capacities to make good choices when they're out shopping for spirits. I mean, the nature of the channel here, I have to kind of assume, take on faith that people actually get something out of the advice that I'm giving, the direction I'm giving, and so that they can go out and make better choices. But there is an argument to be made that most of the time, when we choose whatever bottle we happen to be buying, it all comes down to conditioning to some extent. It's about branding, cultural upbringing, history. Even before we start bringing like alcoholism, chemical addiction into this. And things are only going to get worse, are already getting worse with, AI and sort of, selective customer targeting already happening. Consumer Reports and Grounds News, I think, just did a whole thing about a week ago where apparently Instacart and grocery stores are adjusting prices based on, where they put which tiers they put customers in. There will be more of that. Actually, footnote. Let me say something a little bit controversial. I swear I will get to free will in a second. It is probably orthodoxy at this point to say that AI is just a bubble. And to some extent, that's probably true. Like the market valuations are absolutely a bubble. And even the guys saying it's not a bubble know that it's a bubble. But that doesn't mean you don't have to worry about it. They remember spring 2000. The S&P dropped like 10% or something in less than a month. And a whole bunch of crap was wiped out. But, Amazon and Google and a whole bunch of others... big names also took a hit back then, and here they are now, ruling the universe. So don't think that just a bubble pop means you don't have to worry about this stuff anymore. And yeah, I know the LLMs and stuff are not particularly accurate, but they will find more applications for these things and more ways to get money out of you and the other relevant people involved. I mean, you could argue. I think it's a fair argument. Well, hey, none of these AI companies are actually making any money right now. They're just kind of passing money along, and that joke about economists walking in the woods. And that's true, but this is also nothing new for the tech industry, right? I mean, Cory Doctorow's been going around every goddamn podcast talking about enshittification and the stages of enshittification, and that's basically what's going on. It's on a larger scale now, but that's what you're seeing. You are seeing them driving up user numbers against our wills. You cannot cough in the general vicinity of the internet anymore without an AI summary being spit out at you. I swear I will get to free will in a second. I swear. Let me finish this. And right now they're trying to get all the big players, the business interests, signed up for this. And the thing that would be funny if it wasn't going to be so destructive is that the people who are currently most excited about AI are going to be the people most paying out the ass when these companies have everyone locked in, where everyone's business and model now depends on these companies, and they can just enshitify their product and jack prices up. Because that's what's going to happen. I mean, that is where this is going. So yeah, it's yes, it's a bubble. Yes, it's going to pop. Don't think that means you don't have to worry about where this is all going. And particularly for like liquor store shopping in 10 years is going to be a very different experience, I think. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but it's going to be a very different experience from what it is right now. So, close footnote. Back to free will. So I take the point of this gentleman very seriously. But I want to clarify it a little bit, because I don't know if free will is necessarily a problem. But it's fun to talk about free will because it's it's one of everyone's favorite philosophical topics. Every couple of years, a book comes out that argues, hey, it turns out free will is just an illusion. Because natural laws and determinism and psychology, all that stuff. And everyone buys it and it makes a lot of money. And they go, that's very wise. And then every couple of years, less often, but every couple of years, there's another book that comes out that says, well, maybe natural law is not so deterministic as we think it is, whatever, throw some quantum theory in there. And so maybe there is some space for spontaneity, for freedom, whatever. And yeah, these debates always go back and forth, and they're never particularly useful, honestly. And they should be reading more Kant. So let's start with that. Well, let's not start with that. I want to start by pointing out that philosophical discussions, if they're going to be constructive, need to start with some kind of clarifications of the concepts, not necessarily definitions, but clarification. And that is the last thing that most people writing successful popular books in philosophy want to do, because generally it's the case that if you get clear on the concept, then what follows from that is generally happens pretty quickly. And that means you can't make money off of writing books anymore. But still, let me make that comment. And the problem with free will and freedom in general is historically speaking, there's lots of different concepts at operation there, and no one's necessarily clear on what they're talking about at any given time. A lot of the contemporary discussions go back to Immanuel Kant, who everyone should be reading on this, because Kant pretty much mogs on everyone as far as this goes. If you go back, no. Transcendental dialectic, paralogism, there we go. Antinomy is a pure reason. Here we go. Yeah. If you turn to about two-thirds of the way into this thing, the Critique of Pure Reason, you'll find a section. I love this edition, the old Norman Kemp Smith edition, because it lays it out like this. You'll find the antinomies of pure reason. And what Kant does here is he writes two arguments side by side. They're not side by side in the Akademiausgabe, but they are here. A thesis and an antithesis, which are opposed arguments. The first being that there is not just one deterministic causality, there also has to be freedom. And the antithesis, that there is no freedom, everything in the world takes place solely in accordance with laws of nature. And he presents very detailed, very useful arguments for each of these positions. It's just that they contradict each other very, very clearly. And, I mean, all of these books that have been written are basically just doing variations on these little arguments right here in the Antinomies of Pure Reason, and Kant comments on them. And he points out, that is a small child. Maybe I can leave her alone for now. He points out that with these kinds of arguments, the last person who speaks is always the winner. It's because the arguments are not really arguments in favor of strict causal determination or everything being conditioned, or arguments for the possibility of freedom. And Kant has a very, very strict definition of freedom. It is the generation of a state spontaneously. That is in an unconditioned kind of way. Will you excuse me? Oh, she's up from her nap. Just watching Frozen, but is likely to run in here at any moment. Where was I? Right, so that definition the power of beginning a state spontaneously is not the only definition you can go to, and we're going to talk about that. But so Kant has these parallel arguments, and his answer to the question, well, is everything conditioned or is there freedom, is essentially, well, there has to be both. Or rather, more strictly speaking, our reason need both to be true in certain different respects. And so he has different ways of resolving this. So one side, which I've already talked about in the past, is just to try to find some kind of metaphysical picture where both of these things could be true in different aspects. And that answer is transcendental idealism, which I've talked about in other videos. I'm not going to go too deep into it here, but it's the idea that in some sense you should be able to view the things we experience with two different aspects. It is not the picture that there is a secret world of things in themselves outside of experience. That is transcendental realism, and Kant rejects that. It is a picture of a kind of deep background generated by reason, thinking itself out beyond experience. But again, that's a larger discussion. But it's an attempt to show that, at least it's not incoherent to think that one aspect of reality as we think it could be exhaustively determined, and another aspect might where at least the thought of total determination doesn't make sense. But I think that the deeper point is just to examine Kant's examination of why we need these things, or why we care enough to argue about them endlessly. Because we do need both the thought that nature is deterministic, or at least very, very conditioned and law-like, and the thought that we are free. If you were doing science, if you were doing natural science, you need to be looking for regularities. You need to be looking for conditions.
Where are we going?
Well, right now, I am cooking a chicken. Mama and Rommel are out buying some treats, and they'll be back very soon. And I am recording a video for my audience here about Kant.
A treat too.
Okay, can I get you a treat? Excuse me for another moment. It's all right. She's got ice cream. If you were doing science, you need to assume everything behaves in a law-like kind of way. In fact, it would be deeply irresponsible and unscientific of you to kind of try to insert freedom into your science somehow. That is not good. And Kant thinks that is not good. On the other hand, when you leave the lab or the classroom, and you go to lunch and you need to decide, I don't know, am I ordering an old-fashioned or a daiquiri? Like, you need to make that choice. Like, at no point is deterministic metaphysics going to come and kick your head in and make that choice for you. You need to make the decision. You need to generate the spontaneous state of picking the daiquiri or the old-fashioned. Now, as Sartre says, you are doomed to freedom. It's up to you. You got to do that. Sorry. So after the fact, standing outside of the situation, you can, of course, look back and say, oh, of course I picked the daiquiri because, and insert your kind of causal explanations wherever you wish. But in the instance, when you act, like you assume freedom. Like assume isn't even strong enough. Like you do it. You do. So freedom is not a fact that you will ever discover in the world. It would be irresponsible to ever go looking for it even. But you do it constantly as a condition of being a rational agent. So the point is we need both of these in different ways. And so what Kant comes up with in the second critique, the critique of practical reason, which I don't have here, is what he calls the postulates of practical reason, which are essentially they function as interruptions of theory or interventions upon theory made by critique, made by the critical philosopher, to say, don't go down this road. If you go so far as to explain away freedom, that might be really satisfying for you. It might give you a nice, happy brain burst to think that you've accomplished something, but really you've just thrown yourself right back into the antinomies. You were right back into reason in conflict with itself because it has different issues, kind of different interests running at loggerheads. So don't do it. Just leave the question aside and try to explain everything else. And that is pretty much where he ends the question. So you can say, Scott, you're overcomplicating this. Freedom is just an illusion. What do you get in saying that? Honestly, I know it makes you happy because the interest of theoretical reason. What does reason want in its theoretical purpose? It wants everything. It wants to explain everything, to answer everything, to close the book. Even if it has to hop many steps ahead in order to kind of anticipate what that looks like. And that's fine. That's great. If you want to go that way, do it. But what do you actually accomplish by saying freedom is an illusion? Because if that's true, it's unlike any other illusion you could possibly talk about. Kant talks about illusions or transcendental illusions or illusions of reason, which are necessary in a certain sense. You can never get rid of them, but you can correct them. This freedom, if it's an illusion, you can't even correct for because you're doing it all the time. So if it makes you happy to say it, great, but I don't know. Anyway, so that's Kant. But that kind of a discussion, and I think, if that's the concept of freedom you want to be talking about, first of all, you need to be reading this guy seriously, and also, it's hard to, somewhere in this vicinity is where the good answers have to live. And I don't know what else to say. I think he got this one. Even if we want to quibble about the details of transcendental idealism, that's fair. But I think he nailed down the right direction, at least, with this thing. But that's only for a particular concept of freedom. And that's a concept of freedom that has a very particular history to it. And that history goes back to the fallout from Descartes, which is why I have Descartes here. It's not even in Descartes himself. Descartes' definition of freedom is completely different, and we'll get to that. But the problem ends up being that Descartes has a physics, right? It's a kind of descendant of Galileo, anticipating Newton, but it's pretty much deterministic. However, what is weird about Descartes' deterministic physics is that it allows for, apparently, intervention from outside of the extended physical world, from minds. And Descartes has a kind of explanation for how this happens. Which is that there is transmission communication through the pineal gland, because that's a gland that sits in the brain and can move about very freely, and everyone makes fun of this. Everyone makes fun of this theory from the start. It's already brought up by Elizabeth of Bohemia in the correspondence during Descartes' lifetime. But everyone just tears their hair out over this idea that minds and bodies can interact in Descartes. So you've got Louis de la Forge in the first generation of Descartes readers. You've got Spinoza, Malebranche, Leibniz. They all take swings at this because it seems like an interruption of physics from something that is outside of the physical. But yeah, if you actually go back and read Kant, if you go back and read Descartes, this is not the definition of freedom that Descartes uses. The The definition of freedom he uses comes up in the fourth meditation. Where is my text? I pulled all my bookmarks out. There we go. Meditations up to till this point. So the major role of the fourth meditation is to establish that God didn't mess up. It's to and to establish the cause of the errors that I was seeing way back in meditation 1. Why am I getting stuff wrong if there is a God and that God is maximally good, perfect, and so on and so on? Descartes writes, this is Adam Tannery, Volume 7, page 56. Next, when I look more closely at myself and inquire into the nature of my errors, I notice that they depend on two concurrent causes, namely on the faculty of knowledge in me and on the faculty of choice or freedom of the will. That is, they depend on both the intellect and will simultaneously. Now, all that the intellect does is to enable me to perceive the ideas which are subject to possible judgments. And regarded strictly in this light, it turns out to contain no error in the proper sense of that term. So how are errors possible? Yada, yada, yada. I cannot complain, but, I cannot complain. The will or freedom of choice which I receive from God is not sufficiently extensive or perfect, since I know by experience it is not restricted in any way. Indeed, I think it is very noteworthy that there is nothing else in me which is so perfect and so great that the possibility of a further increase in its perfection or greatness is beyond my understanding. I'm going to cut this short. Basically, the account of error that Descartes comes up with is that the will, error is when the will sort of jumps the gun on a clear and distinct perception, when it makes a choice beyond what it already knows. But what gets interesting here is the sense of will that Descartes affirms here. This is because the will simply consists in our ability to do or not do something, that is, to affirm or deny, to pursue or avoid. But rather it consists simply in the fact that when the intellect puts something forward for affirmation or denial or pursuit or avoidance, our inclinations are such that we do not feel that we are determined by any external force. There is a history to this. There is a deep background to this account of will in Descartes. But the definition, so there's levels to this definition. The first level is to will is just to do or, what does he say? To do or not do something. But there are other levels. And the deep background of this meditation is Molinism. It goes deeper than that. Luther. Even more than that. It goes back to Augustine. Okay, but let's start with Luther, because that's really a key figure here. Martin Luther writes Bondage of the Will as a response to Erasmus. Trying to affirm that there is freedom of the will. It's not all about grace. And Luther writes this thing, which is a kind of hyper-Augustinianism. Augustinian sense of free will is to be directed. It is not to be arbitrary. It is to be directed towards one's good. That is when one is really free. And Luther makes the case that if you're looking at someone behaving in an arbitrary way, acting freely, so to speak, they actually are not. That is the least free that a will could possibly be, because they are taken in by sin. So there is no free will, strictly speaking, no following one's good, which is ultimately going to be God, except through grace. So grace acts as a conversion of the will to follow and pursue its proper good, which in this case it's always going to be God, right? You didn't think theology would come into the free will discussion, did you? Always something to remember, especially if you're an atheist, go read some theology, because you will discover very, very quickly that a lot of the philosophical debates and assumptions and stuff that you took for granted as being neutral, in fact, have very deep theological roots. Anyways, there were lots of responses to Luther, and then this sort of very dark picture of double predestination, God choosing who is saved and who is damned, and who gets to be free, and attempts to kind of by Catholicism to wiggle their way out of this. And arguably the most prominent and influential was from the Spanish scholastics, particularly the Jesuits. This kind of started with Fonseca and really reached its height in a character named Luis de Molina, one of the most important philosophers you've never heard of. He wrote a text called On the Concordance of Grace and Free Will, which offers a whole big theological picture that I'm not going to get into, but it's supposed to make grace and free will compatible in a certain way. And basically the picture of freedom there, of human freedom, is... back to Molinism in a second. What's up? What's wrong? What's wrong, big girl? You want black hair? Where's the black hair? Excuse me a moment. She's right there. Molinism, right. So basically the picture of in Molinism is that maximum freedom is attained when one is capable of acting, when one is prepared to act, but when one hasn't actually decided one way or the other. So that is to say, the maximum of freedom is to be indifferent. Be careful, be careful, big girl.
Oh no!
And
That's your phone.
yeah, that's my phone right there. I'm keeping track of where Mama and Romola are. So. From this concept, maximum freedom is to be... Ada, please don't. That freedom is to be undetermined,
You stay right
to be undecided. Comes the famous cartoon. Now, Ada, please. The famous the image of a donkey. The indecisive donkey stuck between two equally appealing sources of food who hasn't decided. In this picture, nothing is more free than that donkey. So you get an Augustinian response to this picture, Molinism. Good job, Ada. I have some samples here, and she's playing with them. So within Catholicism, you get a response to Molinism because it doesn't seem particularly appealing, and it's really an Augustinian response that is trying as far as possible not to collapse back into Luther's position. So most famously, you get the development of Jansenism, which later gets disavowed by Rome, despite trying not to be Luther. But before that, you get a character named Gibieuf, who writes on the freedom of God and creature. Not really a character discussed very much these days, but really someone, again, arguing for the Augustinian point of view. True freedom is to follow one's good, and that is something very different from being undecided. And this might not seem like an important discussion, except it gets taken up in Descartes. That is not the right place. So, right after the passage I read, Descartes writes, "In order to be free, there is no need for me to be inclined in both ways. On the contrary, the more I incline in one direction, either because I clearly understand the reasons of truth..." Go pee, Ada, that's great. Either because I clearly understand the reasons of truth and goodness point that way, or because of divinely produced disposition of my inmost thoughts, the freer is my choice. Neither divine grace nor natural knowledge ever diminishes freedom. On the contrary, they increase and strengthen it. The indifference I feel when there is no reason pushing me in one direction rather than another is the lowest grade of freedom. It is evidence not of any perfection of freedom, but rather of a defect in knowledge or a kind of negation. So, this is, first of all, a rejection of Molina's position and an embrace of a kind of Augustinianism, but it's not an Augustinianism that goes on top of, Ada, can I please change you later? Okay, fine, I will put your jacket on, but that's it. So you have the first level determination. Freedom is just to do or not to do something. But then, on top of that, you have the determination of indifference or having been determined either by God or by the truth. But that's not it. There is a third level of determination of freedom in Descartes, and this is the fun one. This is the one I think is relevant to the liquor store. It goes back to the comparison with God, because Descartes does make this point that, strictly speaking, that base level of will, doing or not doing, is exactly the same in God. God is willing in exactly the same way as me, and so it's the imago Dei in Descartes. That is how we are like God, and I've talked about this in prior videos. So, what is the difference? From the fact, although this is in the middle of the page. Although God's will,
hair ties.
no, I can't do hair ties. I'm not good with hair ties. Although God's will is incomparably greater than mine, both in virtue of knowledge and power. Ada, please. One more time. Back to it. Oh my God, the holidays. What makes us different from God? God's will is incomparably greater than mine, both in virtue of knowledge and power that accompany it and make it more firm and efficacious. Although it does not seem to be greater than mine when considered as will in the essential and strict sense. So that is a third level in which Descartes determines the will, which is the knowledge and power which the will has access to. This is also present in Kant, right? And I've talked about this before. In the groundwork, willing is not mere wishing for something to happen. It is summoning everything you got, all the power, all the means, all the knowledge that you have, and throwing it at the realization of whatever it is you want to accomplish. Same thing to some extent in Descartes. What is the will without, any knowledge to direct it towards anything, or any power to actually leverage the doing or not doing that you intend? And it's at this level that I think it makes more sense to start talking about free will in the liquor store. To correct my associate that I mentioned way back when, before the 3-year-old invaded, I don't think what they're getting at is a failure of free will. Not really. I think it is, but it's connected to that. It is more of a failure if we're going with Descartes' terms, and of course you can quibble about what kind of freedom you're talking about. If we're going with Descartes' terms, it's a question of knowledge and power, these things that are always intimately connected to the will and its freedom. The liquor store is a kind of nexus of knowledge and power. Like, it does not exist. Those bottles aren't on the shelf without a whole global supply network, without countless chains of marketing and communication and all that stuff. And most people walk into the liquor store just not knowing very much, and also not having very much money to spend. Maybe some people, have a little bit more. Most people, not so much. And we seem to be heading in the wrong direction on both of those things. Like, it seems unlikely that the strength of what we are able to know about what is actually sitting on the shelf and our capacity to purchase it, at least for most people, is going to change in the near term. So that ends up being much more of the problem. It's knowledge and power, and not so much free will. But there's another lesson learned from Descartes. It's the first lesson of the Meditations. The first act of will that begins the Meditations is doubt. It's saying no. That is an act of the will. And there's no content to that, really. You don't need to know. You don't need to have a lot of leverage or power. You just say no. And that... and it's worth remembering that. Even if you have nothing else, even if you were completely submerged in a world of AI slop and you have no control over anything and you don't have really money beyond what is able to make the rent, maybe not even that. At a certain basic level, you can always still say no. You got that. And yeah, that's the video. Thank you for your patience with me. Hope that was entertaining. Thanks and cheers.